Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on another session of the We Connect Academy Learning from Women Leaders Around the World series. My name is Andrea, and today I am very happy to introduce Sapna Patel. She is the CEO and co-founder of Kinamark, a certified women business enterprise based in Canada. Through consulting, training, and coaching, Kinamark, with its team, enables leaders at small and large companies to think across boundaries so that they can effectively tackle the challenges of our world. Sapna has cross-cultural perspective grounded in the lands and cultures of India, Zambia, Canada, England, the US, and Mexico. This webinar will give you strategies to build your global mindset as a leader and succeed in different cultural environments. Using case studies from Kinamark's experience, this webinar will demystify how to lead successfully in other geographies. I'll let Sapna introduce herself, but I would like to remind all attendees that you are in listen-only mode. That means that you cannot speak. So if you have any questions, please write them down in the chat or Q&A boxes, and I'll read them out loud at the end of the webinar. This is a one-chance opportunity to learn as much as possible, so we encourage you to do as many questions as possible. Thank you, Sapna, for being here with us today.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. And I want to say hello to all of our attendants. Thanks for joining our webinar on building your global mindset. And this is primarily for women entrepreneurs expanding their businesses internationally. We've packed in also a lot of value for anyone wanting to learn about how to be a global leader. We want to thank We Connect International for inviting us to deliver this webinar. What I find very exciting about We Connect is that it is truly international with women-owned businesses from all over the world. And as Andrea said, so I'm Sapna Patel, I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kennamark Inc. And let me start by quickly telling you why I'm passionate about the global mindset. I speak 5 languages. In origin and upbringing, I'm Indian, and my childhood was in Zambia and England and Canada since my adolescence. And then as an adult, after many years in the work world, we moved to Mexico, where I started Kennamark, and then we returned to Canada a few years ago. And my extended family is a real mix of cultures. We've been called a mini UN family. So I know about moving across cultures. Kennamark's experience with multinational companies and their various geographic locations means we have expertise in the perspective that's needed to interact with other cultures for resiliencies and for global competencies, and our team is rich in cultural diversity. So I'm going to give you just a quick overview, but I'll come back and tell you more about Kennamark at the end. And really, we're a consulting firm, and we have a diversified base of client type, industry, and geography. And we work with multinational companies, entrepreneurs, nonprofits, and individual professionals. And our focus is to develop leaders so they can manage effectively across cultures, foster diversity within their organizations, take responsibility for business impact on the planet and society, and excel in complex structures such as the matrix. What this webinar is about is how to develop your global competencies. And as I said, it's primarily aimed at women entrepreneurs around the world who are looking to expand internationally, but there are plenty of insights here for you if you're not a woman entrepreneur. And you will learn to ask yourself important cultural questions to help your business, questions you may not have known to ask. Sometimes when we're interacting with a person from a different culture, it may feel like we're clashing with them. We may get frustrated and not understand, why are things not moving ahead the way I want them to? And this is why, because when you're dealing with a person from your own culture, many things might go unsaid or unexamined because they don't need to be explained. Generally, you don't ask yourself, does the other person understand time the way I do? Even if they show up late to a meeting, you don't question their concept of time. But across cultures, we need to consider this. So when we're dealing with a person from the same culture, we make certain assumptions. And the interactions can be relatively smoother because we have the same cultural code. And even when conflict arises, we use that common cultural code to resolve conflict. However, when we're dealing with, let's say, a supplier, or we want to hire someone from a different culture, we need to ask certain types of questions that will allow us to do business more productively. And that's what this webinar is about. It's about reframing the situation to develop a perspective that allows us to ask better questions. Let's take a look at the agenda for today. So first, I'm going to define what we mean by global mindset and briefly discuss why we need it to be successful globally. And most of the webinar is on how you can develop or deepen your global mindset. And I will take you through the Kennamark process. And we'll conclude by looking at a case study that we have created for this webinar. After I'm done my presentation, as Andrea said, we'll take the questions, but I encourage you, please send your questions throughout the webinar as you think of them, and we'll address them. What is the global mindset? In the Kinamark model, the global mindset rests on 4 pillars: the cross-cultural, diversity and inclusion, planet and the people, and complex organizations. Now let's take a brief look at each pillar. The cultural dimension. So despite talk about globalization, huge cultural differences still exist between people across the world. And if we want to build productive relationships with others, we need to know how to collaborate with each other respectfully and productively. And the global mindset is rooted in this cross-cultural understanding. And this is the pillar we'll be focusing on during this webinar. Another pillar is diversity and inclusion. And diversity is the range of differences between humans, whether it's their gender, their religion, their ability, their sexual orientation, and so on, many categories. And inclusion is how we involve the different people in what we do. So in your home country, your employers or your suppliers might be from different cultures, and you'll need to have the competencies to interact with them in a constructive way. And even if you don't plan to go expand overseas or work with people in different geographies, diversity is coming to you. People around the world are moving, and it's clear that to excel in business, a global leader needs the many different points of view that diversity brings. All right. Today, we face problems that are truly planetary in scope. So the climate crisis and social upheaval are in the news almost every day. Having a global mindset means finding solutions that are broad. As I said earlier, this may or may not apply to you, but many women-led businesses have social good built into them. And the 4th pillar is large companies working across geographies, and this includes, in our definition, it's about working in complex structures such as a matrix organization. And this pillar usually applies to large companies that work across cultures and geographies. Right, as I said, the aspect of global mindset that we'll delve into in this webinar is the 1st pillar, cross-cultural. Now, to develop your global mindset, you don't have to speak a dozen languages and live in 4 continents. And such a background obviously helps, but you can just develop this perspective. And I'll talk about how you can begin today to develop your global mindset. Before we do that, let's talk about culture. What is culture? So a simple definition is everything a group does, how they do it, and why they do it. We're talking about culture as an expression of a social group. This is not about an individual. And we're talking about broad characteristics. Of course, within every culture, you have people who may not follow these characteristics because of personal experience, genetics, upbringing, and so on. But within each culture, excuse me, there are certain dimensions that make one culture, generally speaking, different from another. And these broad cultural dimensions are what we'll look at today. The 6 cultural dimensions are power, relationship, communication, time, person, and change. And cultures are more or less different from each other because of how they interpret these dimensions. Now let's take a closer look. When we talk about the power dimension, we are thinking about what is my agency? How do I relate to hierarchy? When we're talking about the relationship dimension, how do I build trust? And in business, it means to what degree do I need to know you so I can do business with you? The communication dimension is about what do I say and how do I say it? And for example, is the message taken at face value, or do I need to read between the lines to understand the context? Time dimension, what are my priorities? Do I see time as something that can be managed, or do I see time as fluid and infinite? The person dimension is about what is my place? Am I part of a culture that values individualism, or it values community and collectivism? The change dimension is about what does the future hold for me. So do I see change as an opportunity, or do I see change as something to carefully consider before jumping into it? And understanding these 6 cultural dimensions will enable us to conduct international business in a more efficient and productive manner, and give us insights into why things are not moving along in the way that I expected. Before we move on, I want to make 4 points here. We've chosen these cultural dimensions because they align most closely with our experience at Kennamark. However, please keep in mind, 1, most of the models about cross-cultural management are male-centered, and they're very Western-centric. And in our services, we modify these models to fit the needs of women leaders and bring intersectionality, meaning the various aspects that we each bring to the table. And then the second point is that none of these models address working cross-culturally with Indigenous people. And as such, this webinar doesn't address Indigenous culture in the Americas or elsewhere, but it's important to make a note of what is needed. And then the third is that there are many models of cross-cultural management, and some will say there are 8 or 10 cultural dimensions, and they name them in different ways, and models might contradict each other. And the fourth piece is that culture is dynamic. So some aspects of culture change slowly, for example, the status of women or minorities, while other aspects change faster. And the newer generations might push change to move faster. And we're using these 6 dimensions to help leaders to shift how they think and to find win-win solutions when they seek opportunities to expand overseas. That said, let's move forward. How do we start developing our global mindset? Kinamark has a methodology that helps leaders to build global competencies, and it includes these stages. So self-knowledge, openness and curiosity, learning, planning, practice, and continuous development. Let's briefly explore each of these. So in the self-knowledge stage, we're learning when we're learning how others relate to the 6 cultural dimensions, it begins with an understanding of how you relate to them. So self-awareness and self-knowledge is fundamental, not only for the global mindset, but for leadership in any context. Kennamark has a tool that helps leaders to gain self-awareness in each of the 6 dimensions, And if you're interested in this tool, send us an email after the webinar. Briefly, the tool offers a set of questions for each of the 6 cultural dimensions that I just mentioned, and that will help you to understand your own preferences. For example, do you see those in higher positions essentially as equal to you, where you can challenge and ask them questions? Or do you believe that you must show respect and politeness because of their rank or their experience or their age? Another example relates to the change dimension. Do you see change more as an opportunity, or are you more likely to weigh the benefits of tradition versus jumping onto the new? Now, this is very nuanced, all right, in terms of, let's just talk about the change dimension, and we'll be taking each of the dimensions in depth later as well. But women leaders around the world are ready to leave behind the male-dominated landscape. But on the other hand, what if, for example, using solar-powered batteries and cook stoves allows women to also carry on their traditions? This is going on in Uganda, Tanzania, and Nigeria with a company called Solar Sisters. So people are finding a way to combine both perspectives on change. All right, so to come back to the self-knowledge, getting a clear idea of yourself is important, because this awareness will allow you to adjust your actions and what you say as you interact with people from other cultures. Now, openness and curiosity. I'm assuming that everyone attending this webinar has openness of mind and curiosity about others. That's why you're here. But if you find you don't have enough curiosity about other cultures, find the motivation to develop that curiosity and be genuine and tap into your desire to learn. Learning. That learning stage, obviously, building your global mindset requires the study of the country and culture you want to be doing business in. And learning takes different forms, right? So understanding the 6 cultural dimensions, which we'll go into deeper. And then there are visible practices. So for example, what do hand gestures mean? And how do I greet people? And what topics of conversation are taboo? And in terms of language, if you learn even just a few phrases, it'll take you far, and learning a language in depth will open a whole new world to you. In terms of the cultural mentor, find someone reliable who can help you with subtleties you may come across when dealing with people in the other culture. And the point is to use this learning to shift your perspective so you get to win-win. When you hit an obstacle, find a way to get the other person or people to focus on the common goal. Are you asking the right questions? Are you looking at it from the best vantage point, the best point of view? And we'll come back to the rest of the development cycle, but first let's delve into the learning stage and look in greater detail at the 6 cultural dimensions. And remember to keep submitting your questions via the chat. All right, now before we launch into the 6 dimensions, I want to stress we're going to be talking about general tendencies or traits of a culture, not stereotypes, and we're not making any judgments. Okay, and remember there'll always be individuals who don't follow these general tendencies because of their experience and genetics and so on. And I will speak to how each cultural dimension can be dealt with by businesswomen. So let's take a look at these in greater detail. And these next series of slides, as I said, are about general traits. And the countries cited are at each extreme of the scale, right? And there's lots that are in between as well. So the power dimension, you may hear this also referred to as power distance or hierarchy versus egalitarianism. And basically, this means how people relate to those in power, such as their manager or people from higher classes. How casually or formally do people relate to each other? What's the degree of social mobility? Meaning how easy is it to move to a higher social class? Who makes decisions and how are they made? How much autonomy do people have? How do people refer to each other? The importance of titles and the decision-making chain. For example, depending on where you conduct your business, people may not speak up at meetings, and this could be in India, Mexico, China, Saudi Arabia, Japan. It's not necessarily because they're shy. Rather, they may be showing respect to your higher position. And how do these differences show themselves in other ways? In egalitarian cultures, the manager is more of a coach. Employees are empowered to make decisions. So the egalitarian, the examples we've given are Canada, Denmark, and Finland, and there are many others. As I said, this is a spectrum. In a more hierarchical culture, people often will refer to each other by their title or even their degree. In meetings, for example, in Japan, there will be a certain seating arrangement, so people of similar rank are sitting across from each other. We found that in Mexico, people would be referred to by the level of their university degree. And also, decisions in hierarchical cultures are often made by an assertive leader who may or may not decide to consult with others. In contrast, in egalitarian cultures, decisions certainly can be made this way as well, but often people are more empowered to participate in the debate. When you're moving from one culture to the other, let's say you're moving from hierarchical to egalitarian, don't be surprised if everyone uses your first name, and even on important issues, your teammates will expect to participate in a debate, or the people on your team, I should say. If you're moving from egalitarian to hierarchical, the attempts to empower employees can be disruptive, and meetings usually will be held with individuals of the same rank. So those lower in the hierarchy may not speak up. Of course, a lot depends on the organizational culture as well, and that's in whatever country that you're speaking about. Now, how does this impact women entrepreneurs? If you're moving to a hierarchical context, it might take longer to establish your authority. So you'll need to insert yourself so they listen to you. You may have to get creative in finding solutions. You may have to repeat yourself. It's about your leadership presence and taking your space. However, this is nuanced, so be careful and don't step on any toes unless you really need to put someone in their place. And we always recommend consulting with women leaders from that culture. And that's an across the board piece of advice. Find women leaders in your target culture and get their perspective on it. And the WeConnect network is fantastic for that. All right, now if you're a woman entrepreneur moving to an egalitarian society, culture, you need to be assertive and take your space. The next dimension is relationship. All right, it's important to a business person when we talk about relationships with others, how is trust developed? To do business, do I need to know you? Or is it enough for me to assume that I can trust you based on your credentials, your experience, your references? You may hear this referred to as task-based versus relationship-based cultures. It's also called transactional versus interpersonal. And as we see, the transactional cultures are generally Canada, Australia, the Czech Republic, US, and the Netherlands. And the relationship cultures can be China, South Korea, India, the UAE. And so this means that in countries such as the US, trust is assumed, and it's based on how well you do your job. On the other hand, in countries like India, trust must be earned and the relationship needs to be built over time. Valuable contracts and personal introductions are of greater importance for relationship-based countries. Now, if you're moving from relationship-based to a transactional culture, expect relationships to be built quickly and resolved quickly. Focusing on business concerns and reaching closure is highly valued. If you're moving from a transactional to a relationship-based culture, focusing only on business concerns may seem narrow to your counterparts, and doing business with someone you've only just met might be difficult. So you need to slow down. So what does this mean for you as a woman entrepreneur? In a relationship-based culture, it may take even longer to gain trust. This means you need to invest more time in socializing, and you may even be invited to family events by a business colleague. In relationship cultures. If you're moving to a transactional culture, again, be assertive, take your space, get to the point, and learn to deal with conflict in a very clear way. The communication dimension. All right, the impact of communication on business relationships is huge. It affects how you give and receive feedback, and you must understand what is not said and the meaning of silence and body language in communication. All of this impacts different cultural needs for harmony and saving face. Now, you may hear this referred to, the communication dimension referred to as low context versus high context. It's also called direct versus indirect. All right, and we can also say that it is between the what and the why. And let me explain that. The direct cultures that want to know the what, they want to hear the summary of the message first, and that message is taken at face value. And then they might want background. In the indirect cultures, they want to know why. They want to hear about the context and the theory and then the summary. And as you can see on our slide here, Holland, Israel, Canada, US, of course, are more of the direct, the what cultures. And India, Japan, Italy, and basically all of East Asia will be in the indirect spectrum. In practice, what this means is that the low context or the direct cultures, such as the Dutch, will emphasize precision, simplicity, and clarity, and messages are expressed and understood at face value, and repetition is appreciated. In an indirect communication style, such as in China, communication is nuanced, it's layered. What is not said is as important as what is said, and messages are implied and not plainly expressed. So I'll give you an example in terms of saving face. In the indirect cultures, a lot of value is placed on saving face, regardless of rank. And that means not overtly showing. So saving face is not overtly showing that you do not know something or that you have not met a deadline. And people often give you the answer you want to hear rather than what is actually going on. And that also brings in the power dimension. All right, in a direct culture, you're expected to be challenged and you're expected to say clearly what's going on and why. Now, if you're moving from an indirect to a direct culture, indirect communication might be seen that as if you're being evasive and untruthful. So you need to be aware of this. And indirect statements may be misunderstood. So focus on telling or requesting precisely what you want. In the direct to indirect, if you're moving in that direction, questions may not be raised publicly if they could make the speaker look bad. And direct statements or questions or assertions might be seen as rude. Now, what does this mean for women entrepreneurs? If you're from a direct culture, you will likely face even greater resistance than your male counterparts if you're being assertive in a culture that values implied or nuanced communication. If you're from an indirect culture, you need to push yourself outside your comfort zone and really practice being assertive. Understand that assertiveness is generally valued in that other culture. The time dimension. All right, so can time be controlled? Is time rigid and linear? Or is time flexible and something we cannot control? And so in terms of the time management cultures, we're talking about US, Germany, Finland, and the cultures that look at time as being something flexible is India, Mexico, and Spain. Now let's take a look at, for example, a meeting agenda, how it's followed in a linear versus non-linear culture. In a time management culture, such as Canada, the meeting agenda is set and then it's followed. People are expected to stick to the agenda, and if new topics arise, they'll be discussed later if time permits, or we'll move it to a next meeting. In a non-linear culture, in a relationship management culture such as Mexico, we might agree on an agenda, but as new issues come to light, they'll be discussed and the agenda is reshaped to reflect the new needs of the meeting. So in terms of scheduling, time is seen as part of a broader context. Focusing on relationships, for example, will take precedence over punctuality. Telling someone, sorry, I have to run to a meeting, in the US, this is totally acceptable, but not necessarily so in India, where a discussion must take its natural course and it's over when it naturally ends. Now remember, these are in broad strokes and cultures are dynamic. So things might be changing in your corner, in your particular city, of these countries that I am referring to. I'll give you an example of the time dimension. Time and relationship, those two dimensions are closely linked. You might find that in relationship-based cultures, getting things done and people being more on time, these two pieces might be easier once you've developed a relationship with people in the other culture. This entire time dimension can be frustrating for people from time management cultures where time is seen as scarce and something that can be measured. All right, so if you're moving from a time management culture to a relationship management culture, a couple of tips are withhold judgment. So the difference in the concept of time does not reflect on people's competence or respect for you or so on. And don't expect to be able to plan all of the activities on a tight schedule. If you're going from a relationship management culture to a time management culture, keep in mind that coming late to a meeting is a sign of disrespect, and it's assumed that all activities are going to be carefully planned and scheduled. All right, the person dimension. So is a person seen as more of an independent individual with her own motivations, desires, and successes, such as in the more individualistic cultures such as New Zealand, Australia, and Poland? Or is she seen as part of a group or a community, such as in Egypt, Japan, and Vietnam? And this is about the contribution of the team as a whole versus individual contribution. In really broad strokes, this division can also be seen as the division between Western versus Eastern cultures, or the global North versus the global South. I'll give you an example. This dimension has an important role to play in how people present themselves in a hiring interview. So in a group or community collectivity-based candidate will speak about team achievements and may find it inappropriate or boastful to speak about her own personal achievements. However, in contrast, in the individualistic culture, the reverse is true. People highlight what they personally have achieved. Again, this is shifting, right, because of social media and other factors that are changing culture. So this is something to keep in mind. And hiring people from a community-based culture might be challenging if you come from a more individualistic culture, and you may need local advice, and you might have to invest more time in background research and checks. So if you're going from the individualistic to a community culture, you need to provide opportunities to your employees to work in a group. And if you're going from community to individualistic, don't only praise the group, especially if one person or two people did outstanding work. Again, a lot depends on the business culture of the organization as well, so that we know that in many business in these so-called individualistic countries, the focus is increasingly on teamwork and collaboration. The change dimension. All right. Today we talk and live in a world of disruptions. New technologies are changing the way we do things, relate to one another, and how we see the world. And innovation is the driving force of business all around the world, no matter what the culture. And most businesses around the world are adopting technology at a fast pace. Nevertheless, there are cultural differences rooted in history and political systems that make certain countries more open to change and others less so. So more open to change. Our examples here are Israel, Australia, and Singapore. And the ones that will think twice and really consider the pros and cons might be Mexico, Russia, and UAE. Now, again, remember, we're talking in broad strokes here. And what we are talking about are deeper values that relate to how change is understood. Is change of all kinds always welcome and sought after? Or is change to be considered with caution? In and of itself, is change good? Right. For example, to introduce change or innovation into a successful manufacturing operation in Italy or France. Okay, these are not listed on our chart here, but it might require more discussion. You'll have to involve all the players and have a debate or a discussion, and that might be required more than in, say, Australia or Canada or the US. Now, what does this mean for women entrepreneurs? This is what's exciting. In many countries at this moment in history, women are rising as change agents, regardless what culture we live in. So no matter where you're from, connect with women change agents in your target culture. Now we're going to go back to the development cycle, and we're going to talk about planning. What's the goal you want to achieve in going global? Do you want to open an office in Mexico? Do you want to develop a supplier in India? Do you want to open a subsidiary in the Czech Republic? Right? Following this development cycle, you have self-knowledge already about how you relate to power, relationship, communication, time, person, and change, the 6 dimensions. And you've studied these same cultural dimensions of the country you want to do business in. So you've done that learning, and you've acquired, let's say, basic language skills, and you've been working with a mentor. Now, as you're doing your planning, what adjustments do you anticipate you'll need to make? Will you need more time to get things done? Are you going to be expected to spend more time socializing before getting down to business? Are you going to deal with resistance to change? How are you going to communicate? These are important questions you need to ask so you can be better prepared, and so you reduce your level of stress and frustration. The next phase is practice. Visit the country where you want to do business. Visit it often. First-hand observation will give you insights like nothing else can. And it'll give you the opportunity to practice what you've learned and to gauge your openness and how good you are at withholding judgment in working across cultures. Again, learning a language is important. Even knowing a few phrases goes a long way to build trust and goodwill, as we said. And we also said that deeper knowledge of that language will truly open a new world to you. An important point before we move on is be yourself. Okay, having a global mindset doesn't mean you're going to become a different person when you land in a different country. What it means is being able to make the necessary adjustments so you can be more productive and constructive and meet your goals. And remember to try to stay neutral. Be curious. When you're confused, remember to ask lots of questions. All right, and the final phase in this, and as you see, it's a continuous loop. So, it's continuous development. What's a continuous learner? Peter Senge in the 5th discipline describes the characteristics of a continuous learner. So there are 5 different aspects, and personal vision. So a continuous learner knows how they want to live and work. And its next aspect is taking an active role in the world and in work. As a global entrepreneur, you're already doing that. And then continuously reflect on your experience. This is related to the self-knowledge we talked about, and continuously examining the impact of new experiences on yourself. Seek feedback. It's very important as you move to a new country to do business. Find people you can develop meaningful relationships with so they can guide you and provide feedback so that you can move your business forward. And then continuous learners use that feedback to make ongoing adjustments. As you practice your global mindset in the country of your interest, you'll get better at dealing with people from that culture. As the last part of our webinar, and in conclusion, we're going to look at the development cycle for how the global mindset would work in a real life situation. And this is a case study that we've built from our experience. So a French woman entrepreneur, we will call her Claudette, wants to have a line of her products manufactured in Mexico. Her plan is to have an existing manufacturer produce what she needs rather than open her own facility there. Claudette, if you see Claudette at the center of the 6 stages of the development cycle for the global mindset. And in our work with her, we first help her with her self-assessment. How does she position herself regarding the 6 cultural dimensions. And we'll focus on the learning stage rather than the other stage of the development cycle here. We have to assume that she'll do her homework before going to Mexico. And her self-assessment reveals the following. Power, so in terms of the power dimension, all right, in terms of the power dimension, Claudette, excuse me, is from a country that is generally more egalitarian than Mexico. People in France tend to speak up and challenge those in power more readily than in Mexico, in Mexican culture. As a leader with this background, Claudette needs to be ready for junior people in Mexico holding back when she asks them to give feedback or take initiative. And she'll need to work closely with managers and team leaders to get input from everyone. In meetings, for example, where junior and senior staff are present, she might find that the junior staff are reluctant to contribute to the discussion, and she'll need to find ways to draw them out. In terms of the relationship dimension, in this dimension, both France and Mexico are pretty much aligned. They both value socializing and getting to know their business partners. And this alignment will help Claudette to build relationships, which can make it easier to eventually implement changes later on, if change is needed. In terms of the communication dimension, this is where things can get tricky because communication can be really hard across cultures. And it does include how we display emotions and how we use body language. Now, both France and Mexico are high context cultures, which means that value is given to more elaborate ways of communicating, and emphasis is on the why, the explanation of principles. So in this respect, Claudette should be fine. However, the French are far more direct in their communication than Mexicans tend to be. So Mexicans could be offended if someone is too direct. When negative feedback is too direct, a Mexican person might perceive they've been told off. Knowing this, Claudette will need to moderate her way of giving feedback. She'll have to invest more to build her key relationships so she achieves her goals. And I'm going to keep putting in these reminders. Remember, we're talking in broad strokes, and culture is dynamic. We need to remember this because these sound like huge generalizations. Now, in terms of time, both France and Mexico are countries that prioritize, generally speaking, relationship building over time management. However, this is so relative. For example, a German might find Claudette is really lacking in punctuality. On the other hand, that might be how Claudette initially feels about her Mexican colleagues until she gets a good grasp on how the time dimension works in Mexico. The person dimension, okay, on the scale of individuality versus community or collectivity focus, France is somewhere in the middle, Mexico is closer to the community end. And for Claudette, it would be safer for her to focus on praising teams rather than focus only on individuals. Now remember, we're talking about a business context with this also. Okay, in terms of change, on the scale, France is somewhere in the middle in terms of risk-taking. But obviously our entrepreneur is way more of a risk taker than her average compatriots because she is an enterprising person out in the world. Mexico is closer to the risk-averse side than France, and as an entrepreneur, she needs to take this into consideration if she wants to introduce changes. She needs to understand that to implement these changes, there'll be resistance, there'll be delays, so she needs to plan her resources accordingly. One important point I'd like to repeat here. In general, many women leaders in many societies are agents of change. They're the ones driving societal shifts towards inclusion and diversity, for example, and we see this across the globe. It's as true as much in France as it is in Mexico. So it's conceivable that if Claudette finds a Mexican manufacturing plant owned or run by a woman CEO, the resistance to change may be lower. And here I will plug Reconnect International because it's exciting for women-owned businesses to engage other women-owned businesses. Intersectionality. I want to put in a few words about intersectionality and how this factors into managing across cultures. Now, intersectionality is the various aspects of our identity. So as I mentioned earlier, it's around gender and race, ethnicity, religion, ability, sexual orientation, and so on. And some of Claudette's intersections are that she is a woman and she is a Black person. And we have a woman entrepreneur doing business in a very male-dominated country. And she's obviously aware of that because France is also very, very male-dominated. So she brings with her a certain strength because she has experience in this, in overcoming these barriers. Claudette is a Black woman. She probably faces racism in France, but being French makes her part of her community, which can feed her resilience and her strength. But the prejudice in a new culture can be an added challenge that she'll have to reckon with. She may need more time and persistence to get things done, to be taken seriously, or to establish herself as a businesswoman in a different male-dominated culture. And there are other intersectionalities that could be more or less hidden from view, such as religious belief or sexual orientation or invisible disability. And all this comes into play when you interact with others. And this is why the work of learning the global mindset is such an individual endeavor, because we're all different and we need to personalize our strategies that to help us succeed. And that's what we help you to do at Kennamark. Now that concludes the formal part of, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what Kinamark offers, but that's essentially the bulk of the webinar. So at Kinamark, as I had said, we have a diversified base of client type, industry and geography, and we work with multinational companies and entrepreneurs and nonprofits and individual professionals. And so we can help you in terms of developing your global mindset through coaching, through training and consulting. We have various online methods. We have online courses, self-directed courses will be coming up later, and more immediately we have directed learning. I want to speak to you very briefly about the three integrated programs we have that are for multinationals. We have a Women Rising Globally program that I'll come to in a minute, and then we also do online coaching with individuals and their online courses as well. So this is an interesting way to get yourself ready to go out into the world, to take your business out into international markets, and then we're going to respond to some questions in a few minutes, and remember, if your question is not answered, you can always contact me afterwards, and I'm really looking forward to continuing the discussion with people afterwards. Now, we're offering participants of this webinar a 40% discount for one day. So until 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on May 24th, you can get a 40% discount on 3 of our directed learning courses on Build Your Global Mindset, Manage Cross-Cultural Teams, and Harness Global Talent. And as I said, these are directed learning courses, which means you'll be taught online by an expert in the field. You will receive readings, case studies, and assignments, and you delve deeper into each area. And all 3 courses are scheduled to start in June, and more details are available on our website. Remember, the discount is only available until 9 a.m. tomorrow, May 24th, Eastern Standard Time. Very soon, we'll be adding another 15 courses on various aspects of the global mindset, excuse me, as well as on how to work in specific countries such as Canada, the US, Mexico, France, India, UK, the Arab world, Eastern Europe, and the list keeps growing. So keep checking back and also sign up for updates. And as I said, we offer online coaching on the global mindset, on leadership and other topics, and you can go to the coaching page on our site for more information. For those who are in the Greater Toronto area in Canada, we'll be offering the Women Rising Globally. It's a conference, and it's a boutique conference, which will include a lot of creativity and a lot of different solutions and ways of working. And it's by invitation only and open to a limited number of participants. If you want to find out more about Women Rising Globally, please go to our website and make sure you send us an email. We can send you more information. Finally, if you want to receive that tool that I talked about, the self-assessment questionnaire, you can send an email to Kinamark@kinamark.com. And we have much more on our website. So please check it out and find out how we can serve you. So thank you very much for listening. And I think Andrea can now tell me about what questions there are out there. Have we been flooded with questions, Andrea?
Yes. Thank
Great.
you, Swapna. That was a very, very interesting webinar Congratulations on that. I think all the information that you have provided, it's pretty interesting for all the people who have joined. I do have some questions and some comments, but first I would like to encourage everybody to please take this opportunity to make any questions by typing them down on the Q&A box that you will see on the control panel. So some of the questions and comments, we have a comment from Tara. She's mentioning that, although she understands that you're talking about globalization, would you agree that this also relates to cultural competency? For instance, when you're looking after a person from the Asian community.
Mm-hmm. So does this also refer to cultural competencies?
Yeah. She thinks that she relates to cultural competency. And she wants to know if you agree that this is related to cultural competency.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of cultural competencies and global competencies, I mean, that's why we talk about diversity. One of the pillars that we talk about are diversity and inclusivity, because it's two sides of the same coin. It's really the cultural competencies that we need are very much the same aspect, right? In terms of understanding how do people understand how we do things. If we come back to that definition of culture, right? How do we do it? Why do we do it? And it absolutely relates to the competencies.
Great. Yeah, the same person is mentioning that she works in the health and health sector. So she thinks that it is important that providers, for example, in this sector are aware of the culture of the person they're looking after. So I guess this relates to what you've mentioned before, that it is important wherever you are planning to work to understand how people communicate and how they work.
Yeah, absolutely. How we communicate, how we understand all the different dimensions of what we're doing, placing the priorities and building trust and so on. Absolutely, we do need to understand clients, whatever the sector we're in. And of course, it's understanding the sector, but we do need to understand where our clients are coming from when they come with health issues or any other issues. I agree.
For sure. You have a lot of very nice comments. Congratulating you for the great webinar. Wendy here, she at the beginning of the webinar, she wanted you to elaborate a little bit more on the power part. You did elaborate a little bit on that, but maybe you can provide a few last ideas on the power piece of self-awareness, if I recall the term well.
Okay, so the power piece is about how do we relate to hierarchy, and that's to do with, really essentially with one of the things that we teach women, and I believe that this goes across culture, is do I think of myself as equal to you? Not higher, not better than, not less than, but do I think of myself as equal to you, right? And really, I gave a presentation about this recently, and the women in the room were from all different cultures, and they were so happy to hear. They said nobody's ever said this, things in this way, because we don't stop and think, what is our internal voice telling us in terms of how do we relate to power? So that aspect of how I think about power, and then how does the other person think about power? And again, withholding judgment. They may have a very hierarchical way of, that they think that the CEO is somebody that you really shouldn't really even cross paths with, and so on. So we need to really understand where are they coming from. They've been raised to give that respect, and how can we tease that open if we're coming from the other extreme on that spectrum of power, of the power dimension. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, Sapna. If you could, share some tips with, people that are not necessarily, ready to go or bring their companies to a new market, but they would like to start, researching about, the culture and important information about a potential market. What tips would you give them to start doing that work?
Okay, so researching the culture, I mean, that can include, doing some reading. I'd stay away initially from the internet because there's just everything is out there, right? So when you're going into a new market, that can be useful when we come at it with more knowledge. And there's a plethora of books. We can, if you want to email me, I can certainly send you a list of books initially in terms of understanding cross-culturally. But in terms of researching a particular culture, I would start off with looking at books and then move to reaching out to people in that culture. And especially as women leaders, women entrepreneurs, reach out, find other women. If you're part of the We Connect network, fantastic. You've already got that in place. You can reach out to people from women-owned businesses from other cultures. And if not, well, LinkedIn is a fantastic tool for that, and connecting with people. And you need to really understand your sector, right, your industry fully before you go out into looking at what others are doing in theirs, right? That self-awareness piece is key.
Great. Thank you, Sapna. I would like to remind everyone to please pay attention to Kinamark's email address if you would like to request the self-awareness questionnaire or send any follow-up questions to Sapna. Do not hesitate to send an email to that email address that you're seeing on your screen right now. You will receive a follow-up email from GoToWebinar tomorrow with a link to the recording. So you will be able to see all the full recording online. But also, if you would like to connect with Sapna to either request a self-awareness questionnaire or do any follow-up questions or potentially engage in any business connection, feel free to send an email directly to her. For now, people are asking if you will be at the WeBank conference in Baltimore.
Yes, I will. I'm really looking forward to it. And yeah, I would love to connect with anyone who's been on this webinar. I'd love to connect, right now via email and the other channels. I'm also on LinkedIn, and also absolutely, it would be great to meet in person if anyone's going to the WeBank conference.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so there are no more questions. We still have a few minutes, so if somebody is not necessarily doing a question, but it's hanging there, please take the opportunity to use this last minutes to make any question. Otherwise, please connect with Sapna directly. The recording will be available. You received hellos and greetings from the Netherlands, from, let me see where else. Yeah, you received, I think, people from different places of the world connected. So thank you so much, everyone. I don't know, Sapna, if you would like to make any last remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Andrea. I really appreciate everyone who has joined us and participated in this, and I would love to have an ongoing discussion. So please connect with me via email, on LinkedIn. I'm going to WeBank as the question was asked, and I'm also going to be at International Day for WeConnect in Baltimore. And but I don't want to wait until then to talk to you. So I am always happy to connect to new people and continue the conversation.
All right, thank you, Sapna. Another note, if you would like to access the slides, you can also send an email to Sapna directly. You will be able to access the recording through the follow-up email that you will receive tomorrow. But if you are interested in the slides or the self-awareness questionnaire, make sure to send an email to Sapna directly. Okay, if we don't have any further questions, I would like to thank Sapna for your precious time. It was a very, very constructive and interesting presentation. I think all the attendees share the same perception with me. It was very, very interesting. If you are interested in connecting with Sapna, send an email to Kinamark@kinamark.com. Thank you, everyone, for your time. Have a great day. Thank you, Sapna.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you to WeConnect.